Welcome. I'm Jackie. For those of you who haven't been to my channel, welcome. I'm happy you're here. I want to talk today about what I personally feel like is one of the most important aspects of health and wellness and really just lifestyle change. And that is the ability to get your mind right, to understand your thought patterns and to be able to focus them and to develop some more positive thoughts in your head, which translates to more positive lifestyle behaviors. So today I'm going to talk specifically about meditation. The Dalai Lama is quoted as saying, I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, but essentially he said that if we could teach every single 8-year-old in the world to meditate, that within one generation, world violence would end. That is a pretty hefty statement or claim to make. But I think by the end of this video, you're going to have a little bit better understanding of why that is and how you can apply meditation to your life to help you transform whatever area of your life that it is that you want to transform. I started meditating about 7 years ago. And honestly, for the first 3 or 4 years, I wasn't quite sure I was doing it the right way. So initially I had images of like Tibetan monks, like just sitting peacefully, like their minds like a blank slate. And really, I looked at that and I was like, that's what I want. I want that peace, like whatever that is that they have. What I didn't realize is that meditation is not supposed to just be like blank slate in your mind. It really is like just the tip of the iceberg of like kind of coming to understand yourself, the way that your mind works and the thoughts that you tell yourself and how that all kind of corresponds to these subconscious behaviors that sometimes are really not healthy and are really holding us back from our goals. So let me tell you what I mean by that. One of the things that I discovered when I was kind of going down my personal journey with meditation and diving into neuroscience, how the brain works, especially when we're trying to get into some behavior habit changes. One of the things I discovered is that up until the age of about 7, our brain waves are in almost a like hypnotic state. Like you've all heard like little kids are just sponges, right? That's like the best time to learn a new language because everything just soaks in. Kids are so impressionable at that age, and based on things that you picked up on from the ages of 0 to 7, a lot of that sets into your like subconscious. And so a lot of behaviors that we do, especially when we are triggered, that are less than desirable, a lot of times can be traced back to some like deep rooted beliefs that we have. And it might not even be that you had like an awful childhood, right? Like some people really did. Some people had, abuse, trauma in their past. Other people had a relatively normal childhood. It doesn't mean that you didn't somehow get some ideas planted in your head that may be holding you back today. So I think that what corresponds with that is I'm going to talk a little bit about how the nervous system works and what our stress response looks like in our brain. Because when we are stressed, we are not often logical and we often go back to reverting to some of these subconscious behaviors. And I think in a nutshell, a lot of this is why long-term lifestyle habit change is so hard if we don't understand how to keep ourselves calm in situations in life that sometimes challenge us, like changing habits, which is a difficult thing to do. So we have 2 different parts of our nervous system. We have our sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight response, and we have our parasympathetic part of our nervous system, and that is considered our rest and digest. That's our calm place. That's very restorative. So the sympathetic nervous system I'm going to talk about first. This is like our survival system. This is when we were, back in the day, like cavemen days, and when we had to survive like wild animals and, human beings just wanted to live. Something in your brain gets triggered in response to stress. So let's say you see a wild animal coming at you, all of a sudden a part in your brain called your amygdala would kick on and it would sense danger. It would pump out stress stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, would course through your system. And these stress hormones dilate your pupils. They make you very highly reactive, responsive to stress. So you're able to run faster. You don't think as clearly because your body is just about getting the heck out of there and surviving. And then the idea is once you've found a safe space, hopefully, then your amygdala kind of kicks off, and you are able to get more into that rest and digest state again. The parasympathetic nervous system can take over, and your body can come back down to like homeostasis, back down to calm. And so the amygdala in our brain has helped us survive for a very long time. The problem being that in our modern society, we don't necessarily have threats of wild animals most of the time. But we do have stress from our bosses at work sometimes. We do have stresses from friends, from family. Sometimes we internalize our stress. And what happens is people's amygdalas can actually become enlarged over time, which makes them hyper reactive, hyper like responsive to stress. And then they revert back sometimes to behaviors that are less than desirable because you're just not thinking clearly. When the amygdala is on, by nature of it being on, your prefrontal cortex, your logical, rational, your ability to zoom out and see the big picture, to have some perspective on things, your ability to empathize with other people, especially people who are different than you are, that kind of kicks off because when you're just trying to survive, you don't care about those other things. You're just trying to survive. And so I think that's really, really important to understand. And personally, I feel like what we see going on in our society right now, where people are so hyper reactive politically to things, and you have to be really careful about conversations that you have with people that I call it, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells sometimes. I don't want to send people over the edge because I make them mad with like something that I say. A lot of times that has to do with the fact that so many people are in that sympathetic, that fight or flight, the majority of the time. Which isn't good. Another really important thing that happens when you're in your rest and digest, when your parasympathetic nervous system is in control, is your mind can go into something called a default mode network, also coined the Buddha brain. And this is where your mind goes when you're not thinking about anything at all, which really, how often do we do that, in our current society? Oftentimes we're kind of in our downtime, we're looking at phones or watching movies, but the default mode network is like where you go to, like maybe when you're driving your car, or maybe when you're in the shower. It's when you're not in a state of stress, but you are just kind of daydreaming, you're just kind of drifting off. This is where we have some of our most creative ideas. It's where creativity really thrives. So maybe we're trying to think of an idea, like while we were at work, we were really hyper focused, and the idea that we wanted just wouldn't come, or we couldn't problem solve something. When we aren't thinking about that problem, that's sometimes where we get those strokes of genius, that insight where we're like, that's what I've been trying to think about. That's the perfect idea. That's the default mode network. It's also where we really develop empathy for others. We can really have that kind of zoom out, look at the world of like, just thinking about our place in it, what it might be like to be someone else in the world. Like we just have all those different moments and insights. And so when you're in fight or flight, your default mode network cannot kick on. So you think about that, like I think about that, how often I'll have a conversation with somebody who is complaining about someone else, and I'll oftentimes try to bring up what this other person's perspective might be. And the person that's complaining about them might be like, oh, like I didn't even think about that, because it's almost impossible to think about that when you are feeling really stressed in fight or flight. It essentially like jumbles your brain. There's another quote, I don't know if this is from Dalai Lama, but it essentially says like, if you're feeling busy, if you're feeling stressed, meditate more. And it seems counterintuitive. Like, why would I sit and not do anything if I need to get a million things done, a million tasks done? Well, when you meditate, it really like organizes your brain better. It's hard to explain that to someone if you haven't been meditating yet, but trust me, it's true. Like, you have to make it a priority. Like if I meditate like for 10 minutes, after that, I'm so much more productive. It's essentially like everything has calmed down and I'm not as scattered as I was feeling before that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happens when we meditate. So there's a lot of different ways to meditate. I enjoy doing something called mindfulness meditation because it really doesn't take a lot of specific training. There's other forms. There's something called transcendental meditation, which people swear by, but you have to go through some classes to learn how to do that properly. Mindfulness meditation is kind of what it sounds like. There's different forms of mindfulness meditation. I always just start with the breath though. I will set a timer for 10 minutes. And I will sit calmly or I will lay down, whatever feels more comfortable to you. And you want to start by taking like anywhere between like 4 to like 10 deep breaths. And I say deep breaths because when we are in fight or flight, we breathe in a very shallow way. And that continues to tell the amygdala that you're stressed out. Whereas if you can take a deep inhale, I usually say like a 4 to 5 count inhale. So you inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, pause at the top for a second, and then slow release back down, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you try to match the inhale count to the exhale count. What that slow, deep breathing does is it triggers your vagus nerve, and your vagus nerve can actually send a signal to your amygdala, to your brain, saying like, chill out, we're good, no danger here. And just by nature of doing that for like 4 to 5 deep breaths, it can get you more into the parasympathetic state of calm. And then you can start really meditating. And so you can have calm music in the back. Some people prefer to just like look at something, like instead of closing their eyes, they might have like, let's say a candle in front of them, and then they'll just like hyper focus on the flame and just try to pick out all the colors that you can pick out in the flame. Other people like to close their eyes and they might do something called a body scan, where they start at the top of their head and they notice how they're feeling. They go down, they feel, cheeks, how are they feeling? Mouth. A lot of times people find they're clenching their jaw when they focus on it, and then they're able to relax. And you basically go all the way down your body, notice how it's feeling. And what you'll find is when you're really trying to be mindful about what's going on right in the present moment, you're noticing how your body's feeling, or let's say you're looking at a candle or a picture, or you're doing more of a visual meditation. What happens is a thought will pop into your head while you're doing that. And that's totally normal. And it's actually a really good thing because it helps to raise awareness about where your thoughts go when you're not actively doing anything. And you notice what the thought is, but you don't get attached to it, and you just let it float on by. And then you continue to focus on your body scan. You continue to focus maybe on your breath work or your visual imagery, something that you're looking at. Another thought will pop in. Totally cool. Don't judge it. That's the key. It's non-judgmental. And then you let it go on by. And what this starts to do is it starts to create some space between yourself and your thoughts. And I didn't understand this when I started. I would have told you that I really don't have much of an inner dialogue with myself had you asked me about 7 years ago. And what I realized, like when I started meditating, is I would have a thought pop in, and it would typically have something to do with a checklist that I had. I had this like never-ending checklist of things that I had to get done. So I'd be trying to sit there calmly, focus on my breathing, and then I would immediately have this thought pop in that's like, have you written that workout plan, that you have to take that client through in an hour? Have you gotten like the laundry done? Did you text your friend about the hangout that you're supposed to do next Saturday? Like my brain was constantly scanning for things that I had to get done. My life is like one long checklist, right? And then I would a lot of times just be like, what am I doing just sitting here? I just need to get these things done. And I would stop meditating and I would get up and I'd start checking things off my to-do list, which you find over time, you will always have a to-do list. And so the other thoughts that would pop in my head, I would tend to overanalyze like other people's reactions to me. Like I was really worried about what people were thinking. Like, oh, that client seemed weird last hour. I wonder if I need to tweak that workout a little bit. Or, my friend last week seemed a little funny with me. Like, I wonder if I did something wrong. Like I had these thoughts that I was constantly worried about things. And so I think we so often get so attached to our thoughts that we inherently think that is who we are. Like in that moment, I would have told you, oh yeah, I am a big worrier about what other people think of me, or I always have anxiety about how many things that I have to get done. What you realize when you start to meditate is like, that's not me. Those are thoughts that are popping in my head. And like in hindsight, what I've since realized is I think I was in that moment 7 years ago when I was starting to meditate. I was in fight or flight like most of the time. I don't think I realized how many stress hormones I had coursing through my body. And they were telling me essentially that, like, you know, you have to do all of these things. Like it was the idea of like, you're not worthy unless you're accomplishing these things. Like you're not of value unless all of your clients are happy, or you're not of value unless, you know, your friends all love you. Like I had all of these thoughts that were all really, you could trace it back to some of my subconscious behavior patterns that were so much about like people pleasing and worrying about what other people thought of me. And once I realized that, it was that big aha where I was able to detach a little bit more from my thoughts instead of trying to solve them during the meditation. Like instead of overanalyzing what my friend would have said, you know, that last weekend, I am able to actually like just let it pass. I've heard of this visual imagery, like it's like you're looking at a highway while you're meditating, and every thought that you have is a car that's just driving by, and your only job is to just let it drive on by. You don't get in the car with it and try to solve it. You just let it go. There's nothing that you're trying to solve or do in your meditation. It's really just purely observing. That starts to build, just like a muscle, it builds these new connections in your brain. And they've done studies where they scan people's brains after regularly meditating, and it's amazing what they find. People have increased gray matter in their hippocampus, so that helps with like memory retention. It helps people think more clearly. It helps, again, like I talked about with the whole stress response, it really helps people's emotional reactivity. It helps them to become more of an observer rather than to react and be totally responsive to situations. And I think when people are looking to change their trajectory in their life, they're looking to change their life habits, they don't realize how much they are doing on autopilot because they are so easily triggered by day-to-day situations. And then they go into that reactive mode where they're not thinking clearly. And then it's really, really hard to change your patterns of behavior. Let me give you an example. It is very common. I've talked about this in like a couple of different videos in the health and wellness world, to have this all or nothing mentality about your health and well-being. And so if someone has a weight loss goal, let's say, they will be all in and they'll log all their food, they'll get all the workouts in, and then let's say 3 weeks into it, you know, they're feeling good. Let's say they have a vacation. And let's say a couple of days into the vacation, they kind of forget about the workouts and they stop tracking their food, and they come back in town and then hop on the scale, and let's say they've gained a couple pounds on vacation. I have seen this happen. I've seen this happen multiple times. Sometimes there are tears when they come back. Sometimes they give up and they say, this just isn't for me. I'm just not a person that's ever going to be like at the weight that I want to be at. And what they're not realizing is when they are in that state of frustration, or when they are feeling triggered, let's say on vacation even, like let's say they have a fight with a family member and then all of a sudden like they start reaching for foods that aren't quite so healthy, they're having a hard time realizing like these triggers are causing them to like revert back to behavior patterns, subconscious behavior patterns that tell them to make myself feel better, right? Like I reach for these types of foods or alcohol or whatever it may be to self-soothe. It might be when they hop on the scale, when they come back, instead of being like, you know what, I really enjoyed my vacation, well, let's get back to work. Their amygdala triggering their stress response causes them to go into patterns of thinking of, you know what, I'm just not good enough. I will never be the weight that I want to be. I'm just going to give up now rather than putting myself through this misery. And so, and I don't know what it is for you. I don't know what it is for anyone. It's all about the work that you do with yourself. All that I can say is, from my perspective, the mind is what needs to come first, because the healthy lifestyle choices will always follow when you understand your triggers and you understand how to be more of an observer of your behaviors and your actions, and you notice those patterns. Because once you start to notice those patterns of thinking, like once I started to notice personally, my patterns of thinking were very like high anxiety, high stress, kind of expecting the worst case scenario sometimes. If someone would say something rude, feeling immediately like, well, what did I do, to them? Like, what could I do better? I had no idea that that's where my mind went most of the time. And I also had no idea that I could actually shift that way of thinking, because you don't even know you're doing it. So how are you going to change your trajectory if you have no idea where your mind goes when it's not actively engaged or triggered, by other people? And so that's why I'm such a big proponent of meditation for everybody, because if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling kind of stumped and you don't know what the next best step is, one of the things that you really need to do is you need to try to sit in a more quiet space with yourself and just observe. And I'm going to do videos after this where I talk about some strategies where I can say, okay, now that you've recognized, where your mind goes when you meditate and some of these triggers that you might have, here are some things that you can do to redirect your thoughts, to create healthier habits, to kind of reshape that subconscious belief system so that you do feel like you are capable of achieving these things that you've always wanted to achieve. And that's really like where the magic happens. So with all of that being said, comment below if you have any questions. Give it a shot. I would challenge all of you for the next week or two to set a 10-minute timer and to do a meditation every single day, even if it feels like you're not doing it right. And your only job is just to observe. It's not to change anything. It's not to fix anything or do anything. It's really just to observe your patterns of thought. And it is going to be eye-opening. Try really hard to be non-judgmental. Don't beat yourself up, because you need to create some space between you and your thoughts. Okay, I'll leave you with this. One of my favorite images to describe what meditation can help with to create this space between your thoughts. I believe it was from the Headspace app. I believe it was a commercial that they had, and it was this cartoon kind of graphic playing out. It was a guy sitting on an airplane, and he was trying to get some sleep. So he had, I think he has like sleep goggles on, and like there was a woman with a young baby in front of him, and the baby was crying, and he could see he was getting more and more frustrated. In his mind, he had like a thought bubble pop up of him like leaping over the seat and like strangling the baby, and that sounds awful. And if you don't think of yourself as being separate from your thoughts, like you think of your thoughts as being a reflection of you, like I've had these moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, like who thinks that way? Like I'm such a terrible person. Like why would that thought pop in my head? But when you meditate and a stressful thought like that pops in your head, you're much more likely to notice it and be like, almost laugh, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that thought popped up. I must be feeling really stressed out. It must be telling me something. I need to get more sleep. And you recognize like that thought is not something that you're ever going to do or that you would plan on doing, but it's just a trigger for you. It's just what happens when you're in that fight or flight response. And so you don't have feelings of shame and guilt surrounding it. Instead, you recognize it and you just let it pass. And then you're much more inclined to be able to be very present in the moment that you're in, and you're probably going to be more relaxed and just to be able to kind of breathe through it, as opposed to sitting there and getting more and more and more stressed. So there are a lot of free like YouTube videos. If you just type in on YouTube 10-minute meditation for beginners, it will be a little more of a guided meditation. If you don't feel quite so comfortable just setting a 10-minute timer and just noticing your thoughts and focusing on your breathing, that's totally understandable. I think guided meditations are a great way to get started. So you could check those out. Or just sit and, do your 4-count breath, 4 counts up, 4 counts down for 10 minutes. Notice where your thoughts go. All right. Good luck, everybody. See you next time.